Friday Night in Toronto, written by James Hardiment, narrated and voiced by James Hardiment. Visit www.jameshardiment.com for more entertainment. Thank you for supporting me and my art. Enjoy. Chapter 1. It was an overcast, warm summer morning in the city of Windsor, Ontario, Canada, as Jake waited for a train with his best friends, Troy and Renee. He carried with him a piano keyboard in a black bag. Troy had a guitar in his possession, and Renee had a keytar, which was a synthesizer keyboard shaped like a guitar. Together with a drum machine called Little Lynn, the group formed a synth-pop group of musicians known simply as Grace, a name Jake had chosen for some unknown reason to his fellow bandmates. They had often pondered on where it had originated from, but Jake kept his lips sealed regarding such matters. The secret lay deep inside his broken soul. Today was a big day for the boys. They were headed to the city of Toronto, the provincial capital and largest city in the entire country, to play 2 music shows. Jake's university friend and former roommate, Dave, was the manager who would line the gigs up for them for a handsome cut of the proceeds. Dave was the stage manager of a neon-themed fashion show at a rather large and imposing department store, their flagship location in the heartbeat of the city. People often compared Toronto to cities such as New York, the place to be if you were serious about making it big, potentially even worldwide. The show was to have live musical accompaniment that the trio would provide. The next performance was at the Shoehorn Inn later that same night. The bar was a catalyst for great artists, known for its up-and-coming acts that had passed through it. Some of the bands that had played at the venue had made it as mega stars and gone global, which was an aspiration the boys had shared since they had formed the musical pact. It wasn't about the fame, more the freedom to be able to make the songs they wanted to, without having to lose out on precious time working their boring 9-to-5 jobs. The area surrounding the train and station was heavily industrial, breweries and distilleries, some of which had been around for over a century. Jake knew his history and had even wrote one of the band's songs about the time period, known as Prohibition, in the 1920s. During Prohibition, the sale of liquor and other alcohol was banned in the United States and Canada. A legal loophole allowed Canadian-based companies to export only, so the area became a hotbed for alcoholic beverage production due to its position on the US border and the close proximity to the city of Detroit. Along with the booze came the bootleggers, who smuggled the drinks to the thirsty United States and also Canadians, with a variety of colorful transportation methods. Present day, the world was a different place, but it made Jake wonder, as he stared at an advertisement for a local whiskey, how his ancestors had risked their livelihoods to get a decent drink. It was way too early to think about a brew, and he decided to focus his thoughts on the day ahead. Grace was about to play in a whole new city, and he wanted to make sure they gave their A game today. He looked over at his bandmates, Troy the guitarist, who had a cigarette perched above his ear. He wore a white wife beater with a thin, worn black leather jacket. He resembled that famous classic Hollywood legend James Dean, except with a buzz cut and if he had lost a few fights with his crooked nose and rough skin. He was clean-shaven with a light scar on his left cheek. Troy had grown up poor. His parents had split when he was a boy, and playing the guitar was his creative outlet. His mother was Native American, and his father was Scottish. He was the rebel of the group. Training to be a car mechanic, he spent every waking hour inhaling smoke, whether it be from vehicles or from those cancer sticks he enjoyed. Rennie had told him to quit, but he never listened to Frenchie, as he had nicknamed his French-Canadian companion, out of disdain. René was from the French-speaking province of Quebec and was a Frenchman through and through. He had met Jake at university and was studying to be an architect. The guy had grown up a whole different class due to his parents' immense wealth. They owned a large retail chain, amongst other companies and holdings that they had significant investments in. As a result of that kind of background, Rennie was a bit of a snob, but wanted to make a name for himself. He was classically trained on the piano, and his passion for music far exceeded building design. He stood slender, broad in the shoulders and arms, but not too exaggerated. 6 feet tall, relaxed and smooth, in a cream light linen double-breasted blazer, with dark blue jeans and a pink t-shirt, resembling a French version of actor Don Johnson with designer stubble and neatly combed back auburn hair to boot. As for Jake, he was somewhere in between the class system. His parents were decently compensated, and he lived a typical middle-class life. He had a short back and sides haircut, blonde in color, with a clean-shaven face. He played the keyboard and sang lead vocals, as well as writing most of the songs for the band. He went to university to study communications, with a deep passion for film, television, and theater. When Jake wasn't playing music, he was playing with cameras and editing software. He was dressed in a green cargo-style jacket with light blue faded jeans. The conductor exited the train, which was humming its mechanical tune, to make an announcement Hardiment, he was a portly older French fellow and had a curly mustache. All he lacked was a pocket watch, and he could have been straight from an old-time film. Attention, mesdames et messieurs, the train is now boarding. If I could have you single file with your tickets at the ready, it would be most appreciated. Jake pulled out his stub, as did his friends, as they prepared to board in line. The other passengers around them soon followed suit, their early morning faces relieved to be finally boarding the carriages. The aroma of coffee beans filled the air, mixed with the smell of diesel-powered train exhaust. Troy looked like he needed the caffeine boost the most. I knew I had time to grab a coffee. He sulked at Jake for his earlier decision to wait in case they started to board. There was a cafe not too far from the station, but he didn't want to leave it to chance. Then something silly would happen, which would result in a missed train. Not today, of all days. This was a long-haul flight towards their musical ambitions, and he didn't want them to be grounded before takeoff. Relax, Troy. They'll serve you a coffee on the train, won't you? Rene asked the conductor as he ripped his ticket stub to board. Of course, monsieur. It would be our pleasure. The conductor beamed with pride. His job was to serve his passengers. Troy rolled his eyes in retort. Won't be the same as the coffee shop, Rene. They have a nicer creamer and sweetener. Rene scoffed at his response. I'm sure a train which serves important business clients from across the country can do just as well as that watered-down sugared cream that you drink at your favorite fast food chain. Jake smiled at the conductor, ignoring his friend's argument. I'm sure you'll be fine after a cup of coffee, Mr. Conductor. The attendant noticed the instrument cases. Oh, musicians. I see we have some real talent boarding today. Like all great artists, you just need a good cup of joe, as the Americans say. He chuckled and gestured for them to move along. On board the train coach, it resembled a commercial airplane, with slightly wider aisle space, light blue chairs paired together on each side. The band stored their instruments in a baggage compartment near the entrance of the carriage. Jake then took a window seat at a group of chairs which had a table in the center. Troy sat beside him, and Rene sat on the opposite side of Jake and the table. Outside, it had started to pitter-patter with rain, the window filled with vertical streams of water, like transparent veins down the glass. Jake looked out at the view of the station, whilst Troy took out a deck of cards to play solitaire. Rene pulled out a luxury yacht magazine that he had kept in his backpack, which he then stored in the overhead compartment. The guys had packed light for this weekend trip, much to his dismay. Rene enjoyed having a variety of clothes combinations for different times of the day. What if they had an important dinner to attend with some high-level record company executives? He shuddered at the thought of Troy attempting to dress in formal attire. The man had no elegance or style as he shuffled his tattered cards on the table, his cigarette placed in his mouth, just waiting to be lit. Rene wondered if he would actually do it too. Light up on the train. He would not be surprised in the slightest. Troy stared at Rene as the Frenchman stared back at him with an eyebrow raised, deep in sarcastic thought. What? I'm not going to light it, he remarked defensively. Rene went back to his magazine and left it at that. The world of luxury yachts was a place he could escape from his uncultured friend, who he was almost certain couldn't swim. He imagined himself out on the open ocean, undisturbed, and it was a moment of pure bliss. An attractive female attendant saw the mouth cigarette from afar and came over towards Troy. He saw her approach and grinned a confident grin, convinced that she was interested in him and his overinflated ego. Sir, there's no smoking on board the train. She extinguished his imagination with a firm statement, much to an elderly couple's delight, sat beside him across the aisle. The older lady almost squinted through her thick frame glasses at Troy, like he was an outlaw criminal, just waiting to beat her up and take her handbag. Her husband just glared through his even thicker rim glasses. His frown added wrinkles to an already crinkled face. What's your excuse then? Troy snapped back at the attendant, who seemed puzzled by his question. You're smoking hot, and nobody's put you out. Both Rene and the attendant blushed simultaneously. The line was so bad, neither one of them knew what to say. Jake immediately diffused the situation. He wasn't about to get kicked off the train for his idiot bandmate's harassment of the kind, patient staff member. I apologize for my friend's comment. He has a lousy sense of humor, and we're most grateful for your patience. Aren't we, Troy? Troy looked pissed off, but could see that the situation would only escalate if he took it further. He removed the cigarette and placed it back behind his ear with a grin. His yellow, coffee-stained teeth almost glowed back at the hostess. She nodded, shuddered, and went back to assist other passengers. The old couple still glared at Troy, who didn't even know what to say. What? You never seen a guy try to score before? The elderly, deeply conservative lady nearly had a heart attack as she was flustered by his rudeness. Her husband shook his head with dismay at this younger troublemaker, forgetting that he himself used to be just like him all those years ago as a young adult. The older generations always seemed to see the past through rose-colored glasses and forget the bad decisions that they themselves had made. Jake tried to get focused back towards the big day ahead, but Troy wasn't finished yet. When we get to this fashion show, I don't know if I'll have any time to play guitar with all the babes who want to play with me. 10 million women the city has to offer, and they're all waiting for Troy to spice up their lives. He was so sure of himself that Rene had to dive out of his magazine to pull him back down to earth. First of all, there aren't even 10 million men in Toronto, let alone women. And I doubt their idea of romance is a guy who reeks of motor oil and burns his ramen noodles when he attempts dinner. Troy's face scrunched with offense. Hey, that was one time. Besides, I can always order takeout. Jake smirked and decided to continue once his big-headed friend had shrunk back down to size. So when we get to Toronto, we're going to drop off our bags at Rene's parents' condo downtown, then get over to the department store to meet Dave with our instruments. Troy crossed his arms and sighed heavily. Yes, we've been over this a billion times already. We get to Baguette Breath's Papa's Chateau, then we go meet the Fairy Queen. He referred to Dave, who was openly gay and extremely feminine in his mannerisms. Troy was a real charmer, as usual. If he had a social media account, it would probably be cancelled very quickly. Jake had to agree with Troy about one thing, though, and that was the fact that he had gone over the trip itinerary more than a dozen times that week alone. It was practice that made perfect, and he really didn't want to miss an opportunity in the small window of time that the band had to make a name for itself. The guys had been playing the same circuit of local venues for about 6 months now, and it was time to move up to the bigger league. The train grumbled to life as the engines fired up for takeoff. As the locomotive pulled out of the station, the parking lot came into view. Jake stared out the window and spotted a white, late 80s Volkswagen Cabriolet convertible, which reminded him of an old friend he used to know. Suddenly, he was no longer staring out of a window, but instead back through time to his freshman year of university, transported away from his bandmates and their petty squabbles.